97.3 ESPN presents The Sports Bash with Mike Gill. It's time for Football at 4 with Geoff Mosher, powered by InsideTheBirds.com.
We expect to win every time we step on the field. That's just the mindset that we have.
Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios, it's Football at 4.
All right, Football at 4 time. Here it's powered by InsideTheBirds.com. Geoff Mosher's in the house for today's edition of Football at 4. We got plenty to dive into on the heels of yesterday's news that Brandon Brooks will miss the rest of the season. What do we know now that the dust has kind of settled? I mean, do you stay in-house? Do you go outside the organization? Who are some legit options? We'll get into that. Plus, the news about Alshon Jeffery. What about Jalen Reagor and the running back situation? Doug Pederson spoke yesterday. He had a lot to say. So we'll get Geoff Mosher's take on it now during Football at 4 here on the Sports Bash. Geoff, what's going on, man?
Hello, fellas. How are you today?
Oh, we're doing good. It's baseball sounds like they might be on the same page, so we might get baseball back. Basketball has put out a lot of guidelines, and it looks like they're about ready to go, so there's some positive vibes, I guess. The positive vibes changed by like the 10 minutes, but right now it's positive, right? The Manfred statement has come out, and it sounds like everything's good. So, and Brooks didn't get hurt today. That was yesterday. So yesterday, not positive vibes. Today feels a little bit better. Let's start with that, though, and get your initial take on when you heard the news. Not so much just losing Brooks, but what it means for this team's offensive line in general.
Yeah, I mean, it's a devastating blow. I couldn't help but think of the time that Jason Peters tore his Achilles in the offseason. And, of course, if you remember, at some point during his rehab, he re-tore the same Achilles. He was on a scooter, and I believe he sued the scooter company after because he claimed it was a malfunction and had to go through the whole kind of rehab process again. And I just feel for Brandon. Obviously, he's fought back from the same injury from that playoff game a couple of years ago, and then he had a shoulder injury. He's fought back from that. He's fought back from his battle with anxiety. He's a good locker room leader. He's a great player, and it's a tough loss. Adam and I did a podcast, I think, last week, and it was entitled Depth Concerns at Key Issues. And we identified wide receiver and offensive line as areas that have talent but could also least afford injuries, because when you look at what's in the backup cupboard, it's a lot of, there's names, but you haven't seen anything. And, of course, as we talk about who's going to replace Brandon Brooks and Matt Pryor being the first on the bench to naturally assume that position, you're talking about a player who has made, I believe, one career start in the NFL and less than 100 snaps in his career. And then a lot of young guys that they've drafted in the last few years that can try to, jockey with him for that job, but not a whole lot of proven talent. And so while the Eagles still have a very good offensive line and they're still great at right tackle and great at center and pretty good at left guard, that's a big loss right now for them this part of the offseason.
All right, so I think we all would agree that the loss is huge, but are they equipped to have it now to be able to handle it?
Well, it does give them, as opposed to in the middle of the year when you have to throw a guy in who has really not really ready for it. As of now, at least they can start camp next month, assuming everything starts correctly. Matt Pryor can be the first guy up. He can get the first team reps for a few weeks and see if he can handle it. He can get himself ready. It also gives them time to see if there's a free agent worth bringing in. I imagine they'll still try to look to bring in a veteran through free agency to at least compete. And then also maybe Howie Roseman can look at the trade market and see if there's somebody, an odd man out on a team that's still a decent enough player that could come in and compete for the job. So, yeah, the timing is better than, say, if it were to happen in the middle of the season. But, again, you're talking about a Pro Bowl player who I believe also made an All-Pro team. It's not going to be just as simple as next man up.
Trey Thomas was on yesterday, and he was pretty high on Matt Pryor and actually liked what he did in his limited action. Do you think that it's not enough games to really be able to say he will be able to be effective in the long run?
Yeah, I just think the sample size really isn't big enough right now to make any kind of conclusions about Matt Pryor. One thing that stood out to me in the Giants game that he started.
Yeah, well, he came in the middle of that game because that's when actually Brandon Brooks went down. He started Seattle.
Right, thank you. The Seattle game is what I meant, is that I thought he played with a lot of toughness, a lot of that nastiness that you need to see from an interior offensive lineman, and I thought he held his own against a pretty good Seattle defensive front. I'm sure he had some plays that he'd like to have back, but in general, he held his own. But as you guys know, the key in the NFL is once you get in there and it's your position and you start playing, the opponent starts to get more game film on you. And then they start to do things aimed at what they think are your weaknesses, So they're going to study and see, does Matt Pryor hold up well if we throw, say, some ET stunts on his side, or if we overload his side on a blitz? Is he going to pick up say a safety who might be blitzing through the A gap on a delay, or does he not process that as fast? So we see it all the time. Guys play well, but then once they play a little, have a nice streak or stretch of games, then they start to become part of the other team's game plan and their flaws get exposed. So we'll see obviously with Matt, he's going to have to overcome that.
Geoff Mosher, Football 4, powered by InsideTheBirds.com. Pryor and Trey Thomas was on yesterday, as Hunter mentioned, and he was very positive. He felt that the drop-off will not be that significant, which I was a little surprised by. He watched a lot of film of him in those games and thought that he did a good job in what he does. But my question would go to then, in your opinion, is Pryor the guy that the Eagles want to win the job, or is there an outside guy that you think they should be looking at to make sure that they have a more known quantity there?
Yeah, I think the answer, Mike, to that is yes and yes, in that I do believe they want Pryor to be the guy because that represents the easiest transition for them. If Pryor plays well, he's a draft pick. That looks good for them. If he plays well, he might make the Eagles want to consider what they're going to do from an offensive line standpoint going forward. Adam Kaplan reported on our last podcast that I think $10.4 million of Brandon Brooks' salary in 2021 is guaranteed because of that extension that he signed, I believe, a year ago. So Brandon Brooks, coming off this second Achilles injury, is very, very likely to be on the team next year regardless. But let's say Isaac Seumalo doesn't have a good year, or he gets hurt, and maybe you feel Matt Pryor can play left guard when Brandon Brooks comes back to play right guard. Maybe you just are so confident in Matt Pryor, or he has such a breakout that it gives you options. So of course that's the scenario they're going to root for. However, I still think, and I'm sure they're doing it right now, is they have their pro scouts looking at tape of guys who are available. I know Larry Warford's name comes up a lot. There are some other free agent guards who are on the street, and I'm sure they're actually looking at players from other teams that they think might be expendable or cuts at the end of training camp just to get a leg up on who they might like for their system if that person becomes available. That's just pretty much what any NFL team would do.
If they don't get a free agent or somehow get another body at some point, what if someone gets hurt from here? I think that's my biggest concern at this point is you lose one more guy on this line, and who do you turn to? At that point, do you have to rely on a Jordan Mailata to play right tackle and then move people over? At that point, I just think there's so many moving pieces. You got to rely on a Jack Driscoll. What happens if they don't pick anybody up and one more guy goes down?
Well, yeah, I think they will pick somebody up. If another guy goes down, then they're certainly going to pick up somebody, just like, last year at wide receiver, you had guys like Deontay Burnett and Robert Davis and some other guys that you never heard of all of a sudden on the team. And then even the practice squad had your, River Craycraft and names like that. So they'll make a move just to have bodies. But you make a great point, Hunter, and that goes back to the title of our podcast last week, depth concerns at key positions. If another person were to get hurt on the offensive line, say it's Jason Kelsey, they don't really have an experienced center. I mean, Isaac Seumalo could move over there and play center, but then they need a new left guard. What if it's Andre Dillard, who's going to play left tackle? What if it's Lane Johnson? So, again, they have bodies. You mentioned Jack Driscoll. That's a guy that they're high on, but I don't know if they can expect him to come in as a rookie and perform at a certain level right now, especially without having any of those rookie camps or mini camps to really get acclimated to the team. So it's a dicey situation, and that's kind of like the double whammy to losing Brandon Brooks when they did. It just makes them a little bit more thin at a position they really couldn't afford to get thinner at.
Jeff, obviously, a lot of people immediately went to Jason Peters. Now, Trey Thomas said he's not necessary for a couple of reasons. One, he likes Pryor, and two, he said you just don't move a guy who's played left tackle and then muscle memory and move him over to the right side to play guard. So, is Jason Peters an option at all as a guard? And if he was, would it be as a right guard, or then do you start switching more things around? We know Jeff Stoutland doesn't like to move multiple pieces. You know, that's why Lane hasn't gone from right to left, and Vaitai, I don't want to move as many guys. So is Peters an option to play guard? And if he was, would it be to play right guard, or would it be to play left guard?
Well, if it were to be the left guard, then you'd have to worry about Isaac Seumalo transitioning to right guard, and how's that going to go? I don't think it's optimal for the Eagles to bring in Jason Peters to
Gabe
play a
Kapler
guard
there
position
for you.
and then start playing. Yeah, and then start playing musical chairs. And I'll say this: I think, if there's one only knock on Jason Peters over the last few years, it's the ability to stay healthy. And when you take him away from tackle and put him at a new position, guard position, which is a little bit more of a nasty in the trenches, more contact sometimes, plus your guards are a big part of your pulling and trapping on certain runs. Not that you can't do that with tackles, but you certainly do it with guards a little bit more. Then you're the likelihood of Jason Peters being able to man that kind of role for 16 games to me decreases. Just the way even thinking about it, I just can't see him being able to stay healthy and manage.
How do you think the loss of Brandon Brooks impacts Carson Wentz? Or do you think it'll just be fine? Everything will just continue to be what it would have been anyway? I mean, do you think that he's now thinking about the right side more, or do you think it's just kind of, hey, he's going to go out there and play and the game will come to him?
It's a good question. I don't think quarterbacks generally think about it unless you give them a reason to. When you go back and look at Andre Dillard when he had to play right tackle last year and he wound up being a turnstile, and Carson I'm sure you could sense that Carson knew that he wasn't going to have some time to hold on to the ball that game if the way things were going. And obviously that was an ugly game that Dillard got pulled at halftime. So unless he's given a reason to fear, then I don't think he'll really go out on the field thinking about it. So that question is all about how well Matt Pryor can hang, or whoever's in that spot can hang, and also what Doug Pederson does from a schematic standpoint to help out that right side of the offensive line.
I don't know if you've done the research on this. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but is there anybody outside the organization that's an obvious choice to say they need somebody, this guy's available, that's who they need to go after? Or is Peters the only guy who's not currently on the roster that you think they would consider?
I mean, there's always Julian Vanderbilt. I mean, he's come and gone about 30 times. No, I don't know if there's an obvious name. I know that the one that comes up a lot is Larry Warford, because he just a couple of years ago he made the Pro Bowl. He was with the Saints, but something that Adam Kaplan had talked about on the podcast is that his pass protection had really fallen off there over the last few years. A good run blocker, not a great pass protector. Obviously released for a reason. You go back and you remember when the Saints released Jari Evans, who was, multiple Pro Bowl guard for them. And then he wound up signing with Green Bay, not playing so great with Green Bay. And then he was out of the league the next year. So just because Larry Warford's available does not mean that this is a Pro Bowl guard that you'd be implementing into your system. He's got experience. And even if he's not the best at pass protection, at least he's a guy who has enough experience and can get in there and probably hold his own a little bit. And it wouldn't shock me if the Eagles did some homework into him. But I really think that their best bet is to, go with your young guy. You draft these guys, you coach them up. They're in your system for a reason. It's not like Pryor was a 7th-round pick. I mean, it was what was he, a 4th or a 5th, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. So, I mean, they showed some level of confidence in him. He's played. They drafted Driscoll. They've drafted some other guys. You got to coach up your guys and go. That's what good teams do.
By the way, Warford was a salary cap release by the Saints. They basically drafted someone in the first round, and he was making like $7.8 million, so they got rid of him.
Yeah, absolutely. And Moshe, is Vaitai the perfect example of you don't realize what you have until it's gone?
I guess it is. Although, I mean, I think in fairness, we knew when Vaitai left, you knew that was a key swing tackle for them who would served an important role.
And it seems like they want Pryor to be that guy, right? It feels like they want it Pryor to be Vaitai.
Yes, I believe that they would, because Pryor was a tackle in college and has played a little bit of that in his few snaps here at the NFL level. So they would love for him to be that. And remember, Vaitai was, I believe, a 5th-round pick, correct?
Yeah.
At a TCU, same school as Matt Pryor. So, yeah, they would love to be able to say the same about Matt Pryor.
What about Kyle Long? Is he an option at all in your mind?
That's it's a good name. He retired.
He did say apparently there was reports yesterday. There were some reports yesterday that he is already reconsidering his retirement, but that he wouldn't come back and play with the Bears.
Well, interesting. I certainly think you have to do your diligence on him and see where he's at with that. I would caution sometimes that, you look at the Jets last year, and they were able to coax Ryan Khalil, right, out of retirement to play center. And, it just wasn't the same player that he was, many years prior. And they did have their struggles on the offensive line, and he was a part of that. I think he even got benched at one point. So is Kyle Long someone that they should look at, consider, watch the tape, see if he can come in and help out? Yeah, absolutely. But I don't know if signing Kyle Long means like he's definitely your starting right guard and you're not concerned about his level of play.
Yeah, apparently, real quick, it says he will know with conviction if he plans to play in 20 or 20 or not in the next few weeks. He says, full transparency, I miss football, but at what cost? I'm most likely going to be on the golf course instead of the gridiron. But he said that he was fired by his previous team and that they asked if he would come back. He said, I would wait for a new staff. So apparently whatever happened in Chicago, he was not a fan of. And it's been reported that Joe Douglas and the Jets are trying to pull Long back into the league, similar to what they did with Ryan Khalil last season. That was June 15th. So just a couple of days ago, there was some thoughts that he might be interested in coming back.
So does that make it sad? And to me, it sounds like the Bears were going to release him anyway.
Yeah,
he was going to get fired.
Right. That's what he insinuated anyway.
So, I mean, is that an insinuation that his performance was not at the level that it was supposed to be, or that they were hoping it would be?
Fair. That's fair. I mean, but you know how it is around here. It's a name that people recognize, so he's got to be good.
Oh, hey, man, Plexico Burress, right? Let's go get him up.
Speaking of Plexico Burress, let's transition over to wideout. What did you make of Doug Pederson's comments yesterday on Jalen Reagor's role? Because it sounded as if he was only going to learn one position, not cross-train, and that position was going to be Deshaun Jackson's position.
Yes, I think a lot of people freaked out a little bit and panicked because the reaction was, wait a minute, he's going to be Deshaun Jackson's backup? We drafted our backup with the 21st overall pick, which is not the case at all. I think what Doug is doing is being smart. He's realizing that he has not seen any of his players, his rookies, his newcomers, whatever, get on the field. All they've done so far is Zoom sessions, and you absolutely can't tell what kind of progress a person is making just through Zoom sessions. You have to see it out on the field. And so rather than, as I've told you guys before, training camp's going to have to be different. I mean, the first few weeks are going to have to be more learning and drilling instead of hitting the ground running like it usually is to get the new players acclimated, and especially the rookies. So the one thing that Jalen's got to do first is prove he can play the Z spot, because I don't want to say it's simpler, but that's the spot, like Deshaun Jackson, you're off the line of scrimmage a little bit. You don't get pressed as much, and players, rookies, wide receivers, they don't see a lot of press coverage in college anymore. So it's something that they typically struggle with as rookies. And so he's got to at least show that he can play that Z position before they can say, all right, good, he's mastering that. Now let's move him to X and see how he does with that and the press and then slot. So Doug is being smart. He's saying we got to start him off with this. And then as he learns that, that was the second part of the quote that I think that got lost on people. He said, once he gets comfortable with that, we're going to start to teach him the other positions, but he's got to start on that first. And also, if Deshaun were to get hurt, which is Deshaun's going to be 35, right? Then Z would be a natural place for Jalen to play, because that is your speed position in this offense. Your X position is your Alshon Jeffery, your bigger, stronger guy, and maybe that'll be JJ Arcega-Whiteside if he makes that development. And then if Deshaun were to get hurt, then you would naturally put Jalen at the Z there to capitalize on that speed. But as I reported, weeks ago, and I was told this, and I know it's true, this coaching staff wants Reagor to really be able to pick up on everything so that they can play him at the X. They can move him into the slot for certain formations to capitalize on his ability to make yards in space. He is not going to be, unless he is not a quick learner and unless he falls on his face, kind of like JJ last year, he's going to be more than just a backup Z to Deshaun Jackson. I can assure you that.
All right, let's leave you with this. Alshon Jeffery, they said he's going to have a big purpose in the offense. How does he fit in? Like, how really, if he comes in halfway through the year, where do you see Alshon Jeffery fitting in? And let's just assume that JJ's, made some jumps and he's better and Reagor's a part of the offense. Where does Alshon fit in this offense if Doug's saying he will be a big part of it?
Yeah, that's the one I'm really not sure that I'm buying what Doug's selling. I felt for a long time that their moves have basically told you that they want to get faster, they want to get younger, and Alshon Jeffery fits neither of those criteria. I don't even know how he can be a big part of the off team until he gets on the field. He suffered the same injury that Jalen Mills suffered last year, and Jalen didn't come back until the 9th or 10th game of the year. So at that point, can Alshon be back by the 9th or 10th game? If he is, what does the team do? If they're winning, do they want to disrupt that? I think that there are just so many boxes left to check between now and then, specifically with how quickly his rehab goes and how quickly he can make it back. But I've felt all along that if by the time he's ready to play, that another team loses some wide receivers and feels like they would trade a very low draft pick for Alshon because he has such a high salary, that the Eagles would entertain that trade in a heartbeat. So we'll see what happens.
All right, that's Football at 4, powered by InsideTheBirds.com. That's Geoff Mosher. Tomorrow, Adam Kaplan's in. We'll have more on the Eagles and the NFL offseason, as the NFL offseason is in an interesting spot now. And, of course, Mosher, like all guests, appear via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. All right, man. Well, we will catch up with you again on Monday.
All right, fellas. Have a great rest of your day.
We will try. We will do our best. I promise that.